Hey everyone, welcome to week five of the semester. We're looking at the impact of group climate. I apologize for this lecture being late. Um, I've had some illnesses, and then also my computer decided to die on me. So I'm doing this from my iPad. So we'll see how this one looks online and everything. So let's go ahead and get started. So the agenda for today, we're going to be looking at lesson objectives like always. We're going to go over some definitions. We're going to talk about tempering competition. So that's resisting competition. Defensiveness versus supportive communication. So some lesson objectives. We have discussed the effects of competitive and cooperative communication patterns. Explore ways to construct cooperation in small groups through video example. And then finally, understand how our defensive communication impacts our groups through an activity. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, some definitions. So for the definitions, what we're really looking at is we're looking at group climate. And you might be wondering what group climate is. It's right there. It's the emotional atmosphere. So when we are in a group, when we are in a meeting or a group project, the emotional atmosphere is most definitely there. We are humans and we're not robots. So we bring things into the environment that has impacts on ourselves and others. Like we discussed, I believe it was 2 weeks ago now, the group input. So that's bringing things into the group. That is your whole self. That includes all the stuff outside of the meeting and outside of the class you're bringing into the group. Group climate is the emotional atmosphere, the enveloping tone that is created by the way we communicate in groups. So it is the emotional atmosphere in which we create and communicate in groups. We could have a positive climate. So this exists when individuals perceive that they are valued, supported, and treated well by the group. Then we can also have a negative climate. It exists when group members do not feel valued, supported, and respected, when trust is minimal, and when members perceive that they are not treated well. So basically what this is saying is when we go into our groups, when we're interacting in our groups, we have a group climate that is emotional. Emotions are very much at the forefront. So we can either create a positive environment or a negative environment. And obviously we want to create a positive environment, right? So the goal or purpose of this chapter is to identify and explain why a positive group climate is far more likely to develop when cooperative communication patterns are emphasized and competitive communication patterns are de-emphasized. So that's the overarching goal of this lecture, of this class, and of this chapter. Then we have competition. So competition is a mutually exclusive goal attainment. So when transactions in groups are competitive, individual success is achieved at the expense of other group members. Competition, by definition, necessitates the failure of the many for the success of the few. So what we're looking at here is obviously in groups, especially in team groups, competition is bound to happen, right? You want to look good in front of your boss, you want to look good in front of your professor, so you're going to compete. That's understandable. But what I'm asking you, and what the book and the literature is asking you, is to put that at the wayside, lessen the competition, or change the competition in a different way. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Then we have cooperation. So that's a mutually inclusive goal attainment, MEGA process. So look at the two definitions, competitive, cooperative. Competition, the prefix XEX is in front of the word inclusive, exclusive. Cooperation has in the front, inclusive. So when you want to bring people in, you're being cooperative. And when you want people to go away and be out of the group, then you're being exclusive. Okay. Individual success is tied directly to the success of other group members in a cooperative group environment. Group members work together, not against each other, when attempting to achieve a common goal. Okay? And that's what we want. We want to achieve a common goal. And just like communication, cooperation is not a process, it's an outcome. So that's what we want to look for at the end of the semester. So again, competition, we have individual success. Competition necessitates failure of group goals. So in a group setting, remember, one of our goals in group communication, especially small group communication, is common goals. And if we cannot get that common goal completed and successful, then it necessitates or then it defeats the purpose of being in a group in the first place. You might as well have just done it yourself, right? And then only a few people from the group benefit from the competition group climate. So it's a very individualized group climate if you belong to a competitive group. So let's think of the show Survivor. This is one of your activities. I want you to write to me in an email some other TV shows or some other competition shows or other instances in your life where a group has been competitive rather than cooperative. But let's use the word, or not the word, let's use the show Survivor as an example. If you don't know what Survivor is, I'm going to give you a little rundown. Basically, 18 to 20 Americans are marooned, for the most part, on a island somewhere in the world, usually in the Pacific Ocean. These 18 to 20 Americans, now the franchise has global, but mainly Americans for our purposes, are put on this island with the sole goal, with a shared goal of one person being the sole survivor. So you might be thinking, how does this have to do with small group communication? Because if there's only one person that wins, isn't that individual? So isn't that competition? You are correct. Yes. However, the first 10 or so episodes, which is about 3 weeks in the show's time, because each episode is about a week. By the 10th episode, everything before that is group work. You're in a tribe, they call it. Okay. So when you're in this tribe, you're trying to win as many competitions as you can, so that way you don't have to vote anyone off on your tribe. Because the thing is, you're stranded on this island. You have to do everything. You have to find shelter. You have to build shelter. You have to cook. You have to do all those things. So the less people there are, the less people there is to help out with those tasks. You are also not getting McDonald's every day. You're barely eating. So your energy levels are down. So you have to depend on people in your group, in your tribe, to pick up the slack if there's any slack that's happening. So in the first 10 episodes, you are very much going through this cooperative, or you should. Successful tribes do go through this successful cooperative group climate. However, what we've seen is because you're on a competition show, there is the sense of competitiveness where you might not want to put all your energy into the tribal aspect because you don't want to be viewed as someone who's trying to gain favor. And the reason why you don't want to gain favor with your tribe is because people are going to start looking at you as targets, because at one point, the eliminated people from the competition can come back and they judge to decide if you deserve the winning prize, which is money. Okay. So that's why it's still a competition climate, but it's also cooperative. But I wanted you to think of it in that context because it is a little bit of both. You do want to stand out in your group, but you also don't want to stand out too much to alienate other members. Okay. Okay. Cooperation. So cooperation has group success. So that's why we want the cooperation, right? It necessitates success of group goals. So we become successful if we have a cooperative group climate. And then everyone benefits. Everyone in the group will benefit if we're all being cooperative, especially in your group projects. So is competition always negative though? That's the question, right? Because it has the connotation of being negative so far in this lecture. And the answer is yes and no. Okay. The real issue is hyper competitiveness. So, hyper competitiveness is the excessive emphasis on defeating others to achieve one's goals. That's what we don't want. We don't want hyper competitiveness. That's why it's a yes or no, because you'll see in a minute why it's no. Gender also plays a role. So, males or individuals who identify as male, they tend to be a little bit more hyper competitive. There are more than twice as many hyper competitive men as there are women, and that's according to Gale et al. 1994. Again, this is 1994, a little bit outdated. This gender difference in competitiveness is especially apparent in the workplace. That's why we have these hyper competitive, usually upper management individuals who only care about getting the best results because it makes them look good. What we do want is constructive competition. So constructive competition is when competition produces a positive, enjoyable experience and generates increased efforts to achieve without jeopardizing positive interpersonal relationships and personal well-being. So while you guys are in a group, you all have different things that make you great in life, but also in the class. Some of you are better at public speaking. Some of you are better at this. Some of you are better at that. So make it a little bit of competition. Have the person that's good at that thing do that thing during the group project. Don't try to make new roles. Don't rewrite the book. Just do what you're good at. And then it can be a competition because then you guys can see individually who had the better outcome. But it won't jeopardize the positive interpersonal relationships or the personal well-being. Okay. So that's what we want, constructive competition. So how do we ensure that this happens? How do we ensure that constructive competition is happening? We want to make sure that winning is de-emphasized. So this is why you guys all have a shared goal of completing this project and also possibly getting a grade in the class because you all have individual goals. So there's not really one group that's going to quote unquote win. And I'm not basing it off of that. I'm basing it off of the content, right? So when winning is de-emphasized, the less group members emphasize winning as the primary goal of competition and instead focus more on having fun and developing skills while competing, the more positive the group climate will become. So you guys are all learning small group communication and your respective subdisciplines. So have fun with it. Learn. That's one of your goals is to learn this stuff that we've been talking about this whole time, right? Your goal is to learn small group communication in a different context of presenting and teaching others, because that is the best form of learning something, right? Opponents are equally matched or reasonable, and sorry, opponents are equally matched, which increases the reasonable chance to win. So when we all feel like it's evenly matched, meaning everyone across the groups either has some positives from the group project and some negatives, if everyone had an equal amount or if everyone had equal opportunity to succeed in the group project, then you're going to be more willing and more likely to win or get a good passing grade. Okay. Clear, specific rules. So when clear rules are enforced without bias, competition can be a constructive enterprise. So that's where I come in. That's where I come into the group. This is in the form of grading. So when there are no rules or rules are enforced selectively or haphazardly, competition induces strong dissatisfaction with remaining a group member of the group. So throughout this whole process, this is why I have so many checks with you. And this is why we have so many conversations and so many opportunities to talk about the group project. Because then that is one way for me to ensure that the rules are specific and fair, right? So I'm definitely a part of your guys' group presentation. So let's talk about defensiveness. Some of you probably have heard friends or family say, "Oh my God, Millie, why are you getting so defensive?" Or, "Oh my gosh, why are you being so defensive? I'm just asking a question." We've all heard it. And in some instances, it can be really hard to hear. I know it's really hard for myself to hear it. But defensiveness is a reaction to a perceived attack on our self-concept and self-esteem. So someone gives you feedback saying, "Hey, you could have done better here." Some people would hear that as, "Oh my goodness, they think that I am stupid," or "they think that I don't know what I'm doing." Or we can say, "Wow, they are being rude," right? When in all actuality, they're just giving feedback. It's your perceived attack. So if you're highly defensive, you're going to receive that information as an attack on your personal being, when it's not. Okay. One study reported that defensive communication pattern leads to worker burnout and a desire to leave the job. So when there's higher defensiveness, we all feel weird, it's awkward, it's cringe, and we want to leave the situation as soon as possible. So group burnout and a desire to leave the group. And we usually go through a self-justification. So if we get called defensive, we usually self-justify that by saying and providing excuses that absolve us of the blame, even when no evaluation is offered. So I'm not, if I said that in that example, "Hey, I feel like you could have done better in this area," that is an evaluation, but it doesn't mean that that's an evaluation of yourself. It's an evaluation of your work, right? So if you provide excuses as to why it potentially needs to be better, that's the self-justification and therefore defensive, okay? So what causes defensiveness? So defensiveness comes from negative evaluations, okay? This includes criticism, contempt, and blame. So when someone presents us with any of those criticisms, contempt, and blame from a perceived standpoint, then that's when we go into ourselves and like, "Oh my God, this person's evaluating me negatively." Positive evaluations. So that's including praise, recognition, and flattery. So in actuality, all of your time in higher education should be a combination of negative and positive. It's called the criticism sandwich, right? Or compliment sandwich, right? Compliment, critique, compliment, right? Because it should be a combination of both. Everyone always has something to work on, okay? So it wouldn't be fair to everyone if we all didn't get that same evaluation in terms of compliment, critique, compliment. So how do we make sure that defensiveness does not happen? We praise first, then describe. So we praise the person, say like, "Hey, you did a great job. I love that you did this, this, and this," or quote, "This is a well-written task force report. I do have suggestions, however, for improvement." So you already did the praise. You said they did great. It's well written. Then I'm now going to describe things that can be improved. Use I statements, not you statements. So that example I just gave, this is a well-written task force report. I do have a few suggestions, however, for improvement. So I have some suggestions, not I have some suggestions for you. I have some suggestions for improvement. Make your description specific, not vague. So strive for clarity. Quote, I feel weird when you act inappropriately around my boss is an in-act description. It's not specific. But if you say, I feel awkward and embarrassed when you tell my boss jokes that ridicule gays and women is more specific. That's an example from the book. Okay. So that's a more specific statement that helps alleviate some defensiveness. And then eliminate editorial comments from descriptive statements. Some I statements are undisguised personal assaults. So, for example, quote, I feel ashamed when you act like an idiot in front of my colleagues. Uses the I statement form without the supportive intent or phrasing. Even an I statement that may appear to be a specific description devoid of judgment sometimes travels into evaluative territory. So, remove stuff like when you waste time or when you act like an idiot. Don't even put that in there. You can say, I feel ashamed when you are acting inappropriately in front of my colleagues, and then blah, 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 whatever that specific language is, right? But you don't have to say, I feel ashamed when you act like an idiot in front of my colleagues, because that idiot word is an evaluation and a description, right? So, with all of this in mind, you should incorporate all of these different concepts throughout your group presentations. Ensure that you are not doing these things and only doing the positive things. So praise first, then describe, use I statements. It's all about communication. And if we're all able to create a positive, warm, inviting, collaborative communication in our groups, then we're going to be setting ourselves up for success. So make sure that your groups, you all have this positive communication going on and that there's nobody feeling left out. So check in with each other, make sure everything's going good, and I'll see you guys next week and on time. Okay, bye.